Hey everyone, before I share the content of my video, I would like to just say a huge thank you to all the support I've received to my first video. Now in this video, I would like to relate my experience of what started the waking up process for me. Now before I do that, I would briefly like to share my thoughts on what drives Jehovah's Witnesses. What makes Jehovah's Witnesses believe what they believe, teach what they teach, and practice what they practice? What drives them? Basically, it's an idea. It's the same idea that made about 100 members of the Branch Davidians believe everything that David Koresh wanted them to believe. It's the same idea that made about 1,000 members of the People's Temple believe everything that Jim Jones wanted them to believe. What is this idea? It's the idea that God has picked their religious leaders as his channel of communication to the rest of mankind. That all of God's direction comes through this one channel. Now, the main difference between the two examples I've mentioned and Jehovah's Witnesses is that in David Koresh and Jim Jones, it were two men. But with Jehovah's Witnesses, it's a group of men. It's the leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the governing body. When they speak, it's to be taken as God is speaking. Absolute belief in this idea explains why Jehovah's Witnesses are so willing to accept whatever comes from the governing body. No matter how complicated, no matter how impossible or little sense it makes, they view whatever comes from the governing body as coming from God himself. Now, in case anyone does think that what's coming from the governing body is wrong, they are warned they must never try to do anything about it, but to simply wait on God to do something about it. Because after all, this is his organization. I'd like to bring to your attention the Watchtower of May the 1st, 1957, and to show you how this is cleverly done in explaining to Jehovah's Witnesses how they should handle anything that they find is wrong. The Watchtower says, if we become thoroughly convinced that this is Jehovah's organization, that he's guiding and directing his people, then we shall not be unsettled by anything that happens. If something comes up that we do not understand, we will wait patiently until it is made thoroughly clear to us. If we feel sure something is wrong, we will keep the commandment of our Father and take whatever theocratic steps are open to us, and then wait on Jehovah. Now, I'd like to bring to your attention the clever use of the pronoun we in this quote, which gives the false impression that the counsel being given here even applies to the governing body. Now, the governing body does this cleverly so many times in many different watchtowers, where they'll be giving advice or suggestions to Jehovah's Witnesses of things they should be doing or they should not be doing. And they'll use the pronoun we, which in practice, it doesn't include the governing body. It's something that they want Jehovah's Witnesses to follow. Because when, in this case, when the governing body sees something is wrong, they change it. But when a Jehovah's Witness sees something is wrong, they are then to follow this advice and to wait on Jehovah. So in actual practice, the governing body don't follow this advice. They don't wait on Jehovah, but they're advising the rest of the Jehovah's Witnesses to wait on Jehovah. Now, the more a Jehovah's Witness allows themselves to be controlled by this quote, the more spiritually mature they're considered to be. Yes, the key word is control. It's the idea that the governing body speaks for God that controls every Jehovah's Witness you meet. Every aspect of their life is controlled, from what they can watch, to what they can eat, to who they can talk to. All of it is controlled. So how did I start to get back control of my life? It definitely didn't happen overnight, but it was through deliberate self-reflection of what was happening at the time, and being completely honest is what helped me to start the process of breaking free. I would like to take you back to 2015. This was early in the year. It was right after the Grey Bible was released. And I was actually, at the time of the Bible being released, I was away on a soccer trip. And when I came back, I missed out on all this excitement of getting this new Bible. I set a personal goal for myself to read the entire Bible for that year. I quit all soccer, I got baptized, and my life as a Jehovah's Witness literally started. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses do personal Bible reading, but it's really in connection with the midweek meeting. So they're assigned 3 to 4 chapters that they're supposed to read in a week, and after you read them, you would normally look up some information from the Watchtower publications that explains what you've read, and from there you probably pick a couple of comments that you can share in what they used to call the Bible highlights. And that's basically Bible reading. Now, personal Bible reading is encouraged, but from my personal experience, not many did it. But the reading that I was planning to do was a different kind of reading. I went on jw.org and found a Bible reading schedule that basically, if you followed it, you would end up reading the whole Bible in a year. And that meant reading 2 to 3 chapters a day, which for me, it didn't allow time to stop and look up Watchtower publications and to start to try to understand the Bible through the lens of the Watchtower publications. Now, around the same time, I was working with the circuit overseer. I was quite close with this circuit overseer, and I took his advice very seriously. I looked up to his teaching ability, and I would always ask him to come to my Bible studies so he can look at my Bible study skills and critique it. And actually, believe it or not, he made an appearance on JW Broadcasting. So I asked him to just offer me his advice on personal Bible reading. The advice he gave me were basically 2 things. First, before I began reading any Bible book, I was to do a little background research on what the Bible book was written by, who was it addressed to, basically the context. Now, this was before the highly produced videos came out of basically every Bible book and an overview of it. So I had to do this research before I began reading a specific Bible book. The second advice he gave me was to start at my favorite book. So not to just read from Genesis to Revelation, but to actually start from whatever book I chose and then to read it through and right around, which was the advice I followed. And when I did this, my Bible reading took a different feeling. It had a different flavor to me. I've never read the Bible in this way ever before. And the Bible started to feel differently to the normal Bible verses that Jehovah's Witnesses go back to constantly to ingrain this specific interpretation of the Watchtower publications. I was reading the Bible in context a lot of the times, and all these verses that Jehovah's Witnesses commonly use started to have a different meaning to them. And so I decided to basically start with the Christian Greek scriptures. And the simple reason for that was because my congregation at the time were studying the Jesus book that was released. And so with the Jesus book, we had to read certain chapters of the Gospels. And I was thinking to myself, if I just read the Gospels as part of my personal Bible reading, then that's literally killing 2 birds with one stone. I'll be preparing for my personal Bible reading and also the congregation meeting. And so that's what I did. Now, the research I did beforehand, I basically just typed in Christian Greek scriptures on the Watchtower CD-ROM. And I came across a Watchtower that basically started what I later realized was cognitive dissonance. Now, I'll make a video later about this subject, but basically it created two different ideas in my head that contradicted one another. And for me, that was disturbing. Now, I'll give some context. Jehovah's Witnesses, when you're a student, so in a Bible study, you basically learn that God has made all these promises. He will resurrect you if you die, as long as you make him happy. He'll resurrect your dead loved ones. What else will he do? You will live forever on a paradise earth. All these promises, God promising you personally, and mainly the Christian Greek scriptures are what are used to apply these promises to you. Now, for me, while I was doing the research, I came across a Watchtower that basically made the point that the whole of the Christian Greek scriptures didn't apply to me. The Watchtower is of June 15, 1974. It says this: "Also, it is to the Spirit-anointed Christians who will rule in that kingdom that most of the Christian Greek scriptures is directed, including the promise of everlasting life." Now, for me, this was the beginning of the struggle for control. Right before my personal Bible reading project, I now have two ideas that contradicted one another. For my whole life as a Jehovah's Witness, I've been taught that the whole Bible applied to basically anyone. But now I have this thought, this idea that basically contradicted everything I've been taught so far. So would I let the organization and this idea that the governing body speaks for God control my thinking? Or would I think for myself and let the Bible speak to me as an individual? The choice I made was the beginning of the end for me as a Jehovah's Witness.